Okay, so the big story of the day is, of course, that Parler has now been banned by Apple, Google, and Amazon Web Services, which basically takes them offline. So this is an astonishing thing. It's an astonishing thing. It should scare the living hell out of all of you. It should. It should scare you. Okay, because not only were they booted from Facebook and booted from Twitter, they were also booted from the Apple Store, for example, so you couldn't download the app. They were booted from Google, so like all their platforms. And then, worst of all, Amazon shut Parler down from its cloud hosting service. That's Amazon Web Services, right? Which is basically the servers. They took away all their servers and they said, you can't use our servers anymore. So it's one thing to remove it from your app store. It's another thing to say, you literally cannot exist online because we are taking your servers away from you, right? You no longer get to have your servers. Now, imagine, just for a second, if in the middle of the Black Lives Matter riots, and they were riots, they happened in hundreds of places around the country. Imagine if in the middle of the Black Lives Matter riots, Facebook had been kicked off of its web hosting services. It had been kicked off of the App Store by Apple because people were using Facebook to organize protests that devolved into riots. And people were probably making comments on there that were really bad. Let's say that they were doing that, which we know they were. Or Instagram, where people were coordinating their activity. Or let's say that Twitter, which has been used for more violent threats against me personally than any other app. Let's say that their web serving, that Amazon web servers just decided, you know what? Nope, no more Twitter. The reaction would be, wow, that sounds really, really scary and fascist, in fact. To deplatform entire applications because people were misusing the application cuts directly against the culture of free speech. Not the legal of free speech, the culture of free speech. Again, these companies have a right to do what they are doing. But as we will talk about in a second, when you're talking about monopolistic collusion, which is really what this looks like, I am as anti-regulation as any person in America. But you got to be worried about this. And you should be worried about this because, again, to be kicked off your server, like, here was the idea. The idea was, okay, you didn't like Twitter, go build an alternative, right? I said it. I said it many times. I said, I don't want Twitter regulated. I want an alternative. So Parler came up. Now, I'm not going to vouch for Parler's policies because I don't know Parler's policies. But I do know that what you cannot do is force people off a platform like Twitter. You know, you boot people off or you alienate people so they build an alternative. And then you remove the alternative, right? Everybody should go elsewhere, they said. And then say, okay, so build your own Twitter. You're like, okay, so we'll build our own Twitter. So they go build Parler. And then, like, well, you know what? Amazon Web Services doesn't have to support you, so you need to go build your own server farm. And after that, you know what you need to do? You need to go build your own fiber optic infrastructure. Maybe what you need to do, and if you can't find a bank to lend you, maybe you need to build your own banks. Well, maybe you do. Maybe that's where all of this is going. But imagine for just a second if this had happened around BLM and not around a conservative-oriented platform. Imagine for a second that, again, Facebook had been deplatformed because people were using Facebook in order to coordinate activity in the middle of a pandemic, by the way, that was going to violate not only law, but was also going to violate basic precepts of human decency in the form of riots. And so people would be like, you know what? Facebook's done. We've just taken it down. People would be like, wow, that's insane. But today, the media are celebrating this, like openly celebrating this. The tech bros are taking a bad moment, a really bad moment for the country. They are making it significantly worse because there is no consistent rule they are applying here. If we are talking about apps that allow bad stuff to happen on them, Twitter is like top of the list. Okay, and here is the thing that's amazing. So people talk a lot about Section 230. I've said, because legally this is correct, Section 230 doesn't make a distinction between platforms and publishers. What Section 230 does is it says you are not responsible for open source posting on your website, even if you do some moderation of the open source posting, right? So if there's a comment sections on Daily Wire is a publication. We are responsible for what our editors and writers put up. But if there's a comment section, and then we moderate it to get rid of, for example, violent threats, then we still will not be held responsible for the violent threat, for anything that happens in the comment section. Now, Section 230, to understand what it was about, originally, it was well understood under basic precepts of American law that you don't hold platforms accountable for how people use the platforms. So, for example, everybody uses phones. For years, most crime was committed not online, but it was committed via phone, right? Because there was no internet. So if you wanted to commit a crime, you'd pick up the phone, you'd use AT&T, you'd call your criminal buddy, and you'd go rob a bank. Was AT&T responsible for that phone call? And the answer always was no. They're a platform. They're not actively encouraging you to commit that phone call, right? So AT&T was a platform, okay? And then when it came to the internet, that was also the idea, was these open source platforms were not responsible for any activity that happened that was illegal on the, it wasn't assumed to redound to the liability of the company that allowed the posting, right? If you had an open source and somebody posted a bad comment on YouTube or posted a bad comment on Twitter or posted a bad comment in the Daily Wire comment section, None of those places were responsible for the bad comments that were posted. It was just the person who was responsible for the bad comments that were posted. Then some people said, you know what? We need a better internet. And there are some places that actually do want to do some comment moderation. So they want to get rid of, for example, pornography in their comment section. They want to get rid of spam in their comment section. Does this make them liable because they are now curating? And the answer Section 230 said was, no, it doesn't make them liable. They're allowed to do some of the curation to make the comment sections better. Okay, now, what has happened? So the baseline assumption there was that open threads were not going to lead to liability. Right? That moderation could lead to liability, so we removed the liability for moderation. That's what Section 230 was. Now, we have reversed it. So now the idea is if you do not moderate, you are liable. So the only people who are not liable in the cultural sphere are the people who do not moderate. So in other words, only if you follow the standards, the screening standards, the fact-checking standards, or the informational standards of Twitter or Facebook or Apple or Amazon, only if you do that will you be allowed a platform in the private sector. Only if you do that will you be allowed this. Okay, that's an insane reversal of the intent of Section 230, obviously, which again was meant to protect a lot of these corporations from liability because they were moderating, not in spite of their, not because we wanted more moderation, but because we just wanted to make sure that people who were moderating weren't getting punished extra. Okay, but now Parler has been dropped not just by the Apple Store, but also by everyone, right? By Apple, by Amazon Web Services. Now again, I'm all in favor of the free market, but you have to wonder about monopoly practices here. When the technological instruments that are necessary for free speech are located basically in three companies. Okay, because in order for you to be online, in order for you to even host a website, you basically are doing it through one of three companies: Amazon, Microsoft, which is Azure, or Google, right? Those are the three companies. And it really is mostly Amazon. Amazon controls, according to the firm Stanford, they control about 50% of all public cloud infrastructure. Microsoft controls about 16%, so now you're up to 66%. Google controls about 4%, and there are a vast bevy of like tiny little firms that have a little bit of public cloud infrastructure, but not nearly of the size and scope necessary to actually allow pages to load fast. Latency comes out, and it's a real problem. Okay, so you have these three companies, and not only are these three companies controlling all of the infrastructure, which again, that's okay, they are colluding in what they wish to ban. They're colluding in their standards. Even the consumer-based theory of anti-monopoly, which is one I subscribe to, right? If it's not bad for consumers, I don't really care about monopoly. If the consumer-based theory is true, it is very bad for consumers when all of the companies are agreeing on the same exact standard for what they will platform and what they will not platform because there are no alternatives available. You know, everybody on the right is correctly concerned that this ain't going to stop at Parler. They're saying, oh, Parler didn't keep to our moderating standards. Let me tell you, the moderating standards at Twitter are garbage. They're pure garbage. The moderating standards at Facebook are a little better, not super a lot, as, by the way, the left has been saying. But everybody is worried where this is going to go, and they should be. They're worried that they're going to take down podcasts like this one from the Apple Store. They're worried that they're going to take down the Daily Wire app, saying that it's quote-unquote misinformation on the basis of bull fact-checkers, these fact-check sites that are left-wing oriented. Everybody is worried about that, and they should be worried about that because that is where this is going. That is where this is going. It's going to get worse and worse, and it's not going to stop. They are going to deplatform everyone. Here was Parler's CEO yesterday saying we were dropped by every single vendor.
They made an attempt to not only kill the apps, but to actually destroy the entire company. And it's not just these three companies. Every vendor from text message services to email providers to our lawyers all ditched us too on the same day. And they're trying to falsely claim that we were somehow responsible for the events that occurred on the 6th.
Okay, and this is what's going to happen to company after company. Because so long as the left can connect you to violence, so long as the left can even make the argument, the left's goal is going to be to deplatform you and ruin you personally, ruin your company, get you fired, destroy you in your social life. This is the tsunami. The tsunami is here. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, go subscribe to your favorite sites because you don't know when they're going to be taken down. Go help out the people who you want information from because the tsunami is coming and it is coming on fast. It's already come for Parler. It is not going to stop at Parler. Now the question becomes, what replaces that? Right? What replaces that? Okay, so here's what replaces that. What replaces that is the monopoly media. What replaces that is the reestablishment of the monopoly media. So that's been the whole goal here, right? Why do you think there's so many members of the New York Times who've been stumping for literally years, the Kara Swishers and Kevin Rooses of the world of the New York Times, stumping for years on end, the Juggler Gumblegums, all these people saying every outlet that is not left-wing should basically be shut down, deplatformed, marginalized. All of these should be shut down. Why? So they can reestablish control of all methods of informational distribution. And then they can just control you so we can have a happier America because we all think the same, right? We all think the same because we're getting our information from the same 5 sources, all of which are now the trusted news sources over at Facebook. Right? Facebook has this quality control measure that they were using in the last days of the election, which naturally suggested that the quality outlets were ones like CNN and the non-quality outlets were ones like, the New York Post because they printed all that Hunter Biden stuff. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.